Hello, you're watching a conference special report on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Cameron Archibald. We are in Aberdeen for the SNP Spring Conference, and over the next couple of days we will bring you interviews with some of the key participants. The first order of business today was the result of the Depute Leadership election, which was won by Keith Brown MSP. Keith, congratulations on your election as Deputy Leader. You won 55% of the vote?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, that's very well done in that. What are your plans as Deputy Leader for the future?
Well, I think first and foremost, of course, there's a huge debate about the Growth Commission, and I will chair 3 national assemblies that the SNP will hold over the summer to discuss the impact and the proposals contained within the Growth Commission. So that's the first thing, and if you go back to the campaign I've just fought, I made it very clear I wanted to be a Deputy Leader that helped the policy engagement and debate within the party. So I think that's a great way to start, and beyond that I have said I'd like to have discussions on the Growth Commission with the wider Yes movement and also the trade unions and businesses in Civic Scotland. So those are the immediate plans for my deputy leadership.
Well, talking on the Growth Commission, there's a lot of talk in the media about the division within the SNP on the timing of an independence referendum and on the Growth Commission itself from opponents maybe on the left and maybe on the right as well. How would you characterise that division?
I would characterise it as lively discussion, and of course there's disagreement, but the way to address that is to have debate. Now I've said both in terms of within the SNP there'll be a discussion when anybody can come forward with their point of view through the National Assemblies which we're going to hold, and also in wider Scotland, and that includes the Yes movement, the opportunity to engage with them. All I can say is on behalf of the SNP we are keen to engage, and I'm looking forward to that engagement. So some people will describe it as division because there are different points of view. I would describe it as debate and a lively discussion. And
a final question, and it's in the recent news with Labour and their amendment to the Brexit withdrawal bill. Has Labour's position on Brexit become any clearer?
I don't think either the Conservative, if you like, custody of the Brexit negotiations or Labour's position on it are clear to anybody at all. This is a really important thing. You see what in my view is extraordinary, with a Foreign Secretary essentially undermining his own Prime Minister on a weekly basis. You see him referring to Trump as a way to try and conduct these negotiations. So there's chaos at the heart of the Conservative way that they're dealing with Brexit, and also with Labour. They've had every opportunity to right some of the wrongs that this government have done, put us back onto a path of being within the customs union and the single market, and they have fluffed everyone. So no, I don't think there's any clarity on what Labour are doing. I don't think anybody, even Labour supporters, could say with any certainty what Labour will do in any given vote, and I think that's really unfortunate.
Keith Brown MSP, a newly elected Deputy Leader of the SNP, thank you very much. We then spoke to Ian Blackford, SNP Leader at Westminster, following his keynote speech this morning. Ian Blackford MP, thank you very much for joining us here today at the SNP Conference. You stated in your speech that the SNP are standing up for Scotland in Westminster. With 35 MPs in the face of a hard Brexit from the Conservative government, how do you feel you're really standing up for Scotland with such a massive tide against you?
Well, of course we should remember that this is a government in Westminster that doesn't have a majority, and one of the things I would contend is that there are a majority of MPs in the House of Commons that want to keep the United Kingdom in the single market and the customs union, and I'm asking MPs next week when we have the withdrawal bill to have the courage of their convictions and to recognise the damage that will be done to jobs, to communities, if we don't stay in the single market and the customs union. So I'm asking all those in Parliament to get behind us. I've formed a group of other parties in Westminster, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens and Plaid Cymru, and for example we have a meeting next month with Michel Barnier, and we're making the case very strongly that the last thing in the world that we should be doing is putting our citizens at economic risk. We know from the analysis of the UK government, from the Scottish government, from Fraser of Annan and many other people, that a hard Brexit risks reducing our GDP potential by as much as 9% over 15 years. Fraser of Annan has said that will cost 80,000 jobs in Scotland. It's the height of irresponsibility of a government in London to threaten the lives and the prosperity of the people of Scotland. So we'll be fighting tooth and nail to make sure that we put that case, and of course that will roll on till October. There's a second issue, and that is that we know that through the withdrawal bill that the Conservative government are taking back control of the powers from the Scottish Parliament. 24 areas that were defined as devolved in the Scotland Act 1988. And we've got the situation that all the parties in the Parliament in Holyrood, with the exception of the Conservatives, have refused to give consent to what the Conservative government is doing. Now, of course, the Conservatives, with their friends in the DUP, will have a majority next week. But I would simply say this to the Tory government: you fought tooth and nail against the establishment of the Scottish Parliament. You're now, again, undermining the principles of devolution. You're undermining the devolution settlement, and they should think very carefully of the consequences of what they are proposing.
I noticed when you were listing out the parties that were helping you back UK membership of the single market, Christmas Union, I might have missed it, but did you mention Labour there?
The Labour Party have obviously backed the Scottish Government's position to make sure that we're not giving consent to the withdrawal bill. But Labour in Westminster have so far not recognised that they should be joining with us to protect continued membership of the single market and customs union. What we have from Jeremy Corbyn is a fudge. He's not providing any leadership in this issue. And I'm simply saying to Jeremy Corbyn, recognise the damage that will be caused to those that are in Labour constituencies if they're out with the single market. Labour have got to recognise the seriousness of this situation, and they have a responsibility to protect their communities. And I would appeal to them to join with us in going through the lobby next week and voting for the amendment that would keep the United Kingdom in the European Economic Area. He has failed to do so far. He is as complicit as Theresa May is unless he changes position on this issue.
You talk about how Labour's position on Brexit is a fudge.
Yeah.
Would you say, though, that they're doing a decent job with defending devolution, or could they be doing more, in your opinion?
No, I think they could be doing more, because although in the Scottish Parliament Labour have backed the amendment that came forward to make sure that we don't give consent to the withdrawal bill, but we need to make sure that Labour in Westminster give leadership to the voice of the Scottish Parliament, that they, in effect, they recognise that they've got that duty to stand up for the interests of the Scottish Parliament and have got to vote with us to stop that Tory programme taking place next week. The jury's out as to whether or not Labour will do that, or whether they will be letting down the people of Scotland.
Final question, and it's on the recent Scottish Social Attitude Survey, which showed there was increased support for Scottish independence. We had a YouGov poll showing increased support for the SNP, and there was increased support for the idea that Scotland would be better off economically as an independent country. Does the Yes movement and the SNP now have the momentum, or do we still have fair work to do to get across the line to get independence for the Yes movement and the SNP?
But I think firstly, of course, the SNP has been in government now in Scotland for 11 years, and it's gratifying to see the public opinion polls that are indicating there's very strong support for the SNP. Of course, we've had the Growth Commission report, and that's going to lead to a debate over the coming weeks and months as to Scotland's future. I do think there is a sense of momentum there. Let's get to the end of the Brexit process, at least in knowing what's going to happen come October. And I think we are getting towards a situation where it is going to be right to have a debate with the people of Scotland as to their constitutional future.
Ian Blackford, SNP MP, thank you very much. In an emergency resolution, Joan McAlpine proposed a motion condemning the actions of Young Seafood in closing down Pinneys Seafood Factory in Annan. John McAlpine for South Scotland MSP, thank you very much for joining us today at Broadcasting Scotland. You pushed an emergency motion just recently condemning Young Seafood for closing Pinneys factory in Annan. Why is this motion so important?
This motion is important because it sends out a really strong message from our SNP conference here in Aberdeen to people whose jobs are threatened at the other end of the country. As I said when I was moving the emergency motion, you've probably heard that 450 people are going to lose their jobs when this plant closes in Annan. However, the town of Annan is actually set to lose 1,000 jobs when you add on agency workers and other people who are dependent on the work. 1,000 jobs. So Annan has a population of 10,000, so that's 1 in 10 people who are going to be affected by this closure. That's like 59,000 people losing their jobs in Glasgow. It's quite unthinkable.
Wow, I was not aware of that figure. What role have the UK government played in trying to maybe protect these jobs?
Well, certainly in terms of the response to the announcement that Youngs were going to move the contracts, the Scottish Government had got together with local authorities, set up an action group to find new buyers. I'm not aware of any role the UK Government played in that, to be perfectly honest. But what I do know is that a couple of years ago, the UK Government gave a grant to Youngs in Grimsby, and that's where they're going to move the contracts to. So they have been given state funding to upgrade their plants and workforce, I believe, in Grimsby, and that's where they're moving the natural salmon contracts to, and they're moving other contracts, or they've actually let go of some other Marks and Spencer's contracts.
So just for clarity, these jobs have been in the air since 2015, would you say, or has there been plans for?
Well, I suppose it wasn't clear we don't know what Young's long-term planning was. They had plants in Fraserburgh, they had plants in Annan, they had plants in Grimsby, which is their HQ. They got money to upgrade the plants in Grimsby back in 2015, and at that time there was concern from Fraserburgh actually that their jobs were threatened, but the UK Government refused to countenance that. But Fraserburgh did lose jobs, it's still open, but the plant in Annan now is losing jobs because the natural salmon contracts are going to Grimsby, and Youngs have let go some other contracts and let them go elsewhere, which is relating to the relationship with Marks and Spencer's as the main retailer. And in my speech today I said that Marks and Spencer's as well as Youngs were also culpable, because those people in Annan for years and years have been making meals for Marks and Spencer's, and I believe that Marks and Spencer's as a major UK retailer with a high profile has a moral obligation towards those workers.
Do you think there's still a glimmer of hope for these workers to somewhat maintain employment down the line?
Well,
in terms of intervention?
As I said, the Scottish Government, along with local authorities, is really working hard to find a buyer, an occupier for the site. And yesterday, Paul Wheelhouse, the SNP Business Minister, wrote a letter to Youngs pointing out that there was now one very serious buyer, but it was very important that Youngs cooperate to ensure that the skilled workforce remain on site until those negotiations are complete, because buyers coming in, particularly in the food sector, they're not just buying four walls, they're buying the skills of the people that are there, and these people are very highly skilled, particularly the people who innovate the food, come up with the recipes, the kind of skills, the dexterous skills involved in preparing fish. So Paul had asked Youngs to stop the redundancy rollout until this new buyer could come in. So we'll have to wait and see how Youngs respond to that. I mean, I hope that the message from conference today, sends a message to Youngs that people all over Scotland are horrified by their behaviour, and it's time that they did right by the people of Annan.
Joan McAlpine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We invited broadcaster and journalist John Nicholson for a chat about his day at conference. Thank you very much for joining us at Broadcasting Scotland.
It's a pleasure.
You've been looking at the conference as a journalist yourself. How would you summarise the day one of the conference?
Well, it's got a fabulous atmosphere, doesn't it? Partly it's a beautiful day, and I know every day is a beautiful day in Aberdeen, I know that, but it's an especially sunny day in Aberdeen at the moment, and there's an amazing atmosphere. I mean, you can see behind us, it's absolutely packed and crowded. I'm very struck by how many young people there are at the conference as well. That's great. I was just talking to a young guy who's crossed from the Greens to join the SNP, which is lovely to see. So I think obviously it's a party with enormous vigour. Surprising in a way, given that it's been 11 years in government, but it's still coming up with lots of fresh ideas. But if I had to single out one particular debate today that shows, I think, the outward-looking nature of the SNP, it would be the debate that we just had on Palestine. Two fabulous speeches by Dr. Philippa Whitford MP and Tommy Shepherd MP, both of whom are passionate about Palestinian rights, and have called for an international inquiry on the way in which Palestinian children and medics are being targeted by Israeli soldiers, by snipers, and being shot, unarmed civilians being shot. It's a disgrace. They called it out for what it is, and I thought that their speeches and the reaction that they got from conference were really inspiring, because that's one of the things I would like to see from an independent Scotland is an outward-looking, progressive approach to international relations. How different would that be from the kind of attitude we have to foreign affairs as part of the UK?
You talk about how there's been a very positive kind of atmosphere within the SNP conference. That comes in the back as well of a new data that came out by YouGov and the Scottish Social Attitude Survey. YouGov found that the SNP are increasing in the polls after 11 years in government, as you pointed out, but also as well that Scots actually favour independence over devolution and compared to scrapping the Scottish Parliament, and have more faith with independence in terms of the economy.
I saw that.
To the status quo. Do you think now that the momentum's behind the Scottish National Party and the Yes movement as a whole, or do you think they still have a fair bit of way to go until they cross the finish line by achieving independence?
I think all of those things. I think there is a momentum, but I also think we've got a fair way to go until we cross the finishing line. I mean, a lot of people say, let's have a referendum now because we're going to win it. And I think one of the things that people forget is that on social media they tend to talk to their friends and people who agree with them. So if everybody that you talk to is in favour of independence, you think you're going to win a referendum. And, you know, we're not over the finishing line. I think we'll win the next referendum. I always thought we'd lose the first one, to be honest. But I think we'll win the second one. The demographic direction of travel is absolutely clear. Passionate support for independence amongst young people is absolutely clear. But we've got to reach out to the undecided. And so I think everything we do every day, the way we conduct ourselves as a party, as a government, the way that individual members and supporters behave in social media must always be done with the overriding question, how will this be read, not just by our supporters who support us already, but by the people we've got to win over? Because there were 55% of people voted against us last time. We've got to win over as many as we can of that 55% to get over the line. But of all the various things that you outlined from YouGov, I thought the thing that was most interesting was the fact that there's been such movement towards believing that the economy will do better if Scotland was independent. Because we've always been very good at inspiring people who believe that we will work hard after independence, that we will be socially progressive after independence, that we will be a positive force for good internationally after independence. So everybody agrees with that. But the question of how our economy would do after independence is one we've struggled to win a majority for. And what the figure that you quoted has shown is that there's a clear momentum with an increasing number of people thinking we will do much better economically after independence. I've always believed that, of course, but a majority in Scotland didn't, and it looks as if we're winning that battle.
Well, we talk about the economy just now, actually, on the Growth Commission. This has been a big element, part of the SNP conference, but critics would argue that it's actually brought a lot of divisiveness amongst the SNP. And maybe with those within the SNP would argue, actually, it's about healthy debate. Where would you stand on that? Would you say that actually brings healthy debate, or would you say it actually brings better division?
I'm for healthy debate. I think it's good to have debate at conferences. As a political journalist, I've gone to party conferences of all the parties over the years, and I hate nothing more than sycophantic laughing at watery jokes from the folk up on the platform, a complete pretense that there is no division or debate within parties. Of course there is. It's healthy. It's part of democracy. And I think the SNP is more united than any other party. Well, we know that. That's pretty obvious. But obviously, there has to be, it would be odd if there weren't, debates within the party about the direction of travel. Not on the, not on the huge issues, not on the Constitution, for example, not on civil rights. But there's inevitably some people who believe in higher taxation than other people, for example, and more public ownership than other people. And I don't think that's surprising. And I think what's great about the Growth Commission is it's a highly detailed document. It lays down some challenges. It talks about how it's possible to grow the economy without austerity, which I think is a very socially progressive and liberal argument to put. And it offers various areas for debate, and it reaches out also to people who are no voters. And it says this is what we could do with independence. And Andrew Wilson has said, the chair of the Growth Commission has said, if you disagree with me, you put out your vision. Here's our vision. Here's the scope of debate in the yes camp. What about you? Don't just shout from the sidelines. Offer something as an alternative. And I have to say, I haven't read much from the no camp in opposition to what Andrew has offered. So I think it's a very positive contribution. I think the fact there's so many column inches in the papers about it is a good thing. I think the fact that you and I are sitting talking about it here just now is a good thing. It's a document that doesn't make final decisions, but just simply attempts to provoke debate. And it also is full of detailed argument and good research, and that's terrific.
It's also interesting to see that when it comes to people who are criticised, who do criticise it, a lot of them offer solutions from a yes perspective. For example, Richard Murphy came out and said actually you should have your own currency as soon as possible. Australian economist Bill Mitchell came out recently, had his own article, a two-part article should I say, about why we should have our own currency. Commonweal have given their own versions of maybe foreign exchange reserves. Do you think it's also good on an academic level, seeing that so many experts are coming forward, maybe saying this report could be better in certain areas, but here's our solutions? Do you think then it kind of gives a scope much bigger for the independence movement instead of just being more about single ideologies?
We've got Nobel Prize-winning economists on our side saying that they think, with no dog in the fight particularly...
That's Joseph Stiglitz.
Exactly,
to, yes.
Who's, not even Scottish. He's just looking at it objectively as an outsider and saying, he thinks the arguments in favour of Scottish independence are strong. I've always, broadly speaking, been quite sympathetic towards the idea of us having a separate Scottish currency from the earliest possible moment that we can. There's a very good model in Denmark where they have a separate currency, and in their case it's tied to the euro. It gives them a lot of flexibility, also imposes some discipline as well. As you know, Sweden is part of the European Union and not part of the euro with its own currency. So there are various models. Clearly the currency issue was a huge issue last time, and one of the problems was we allowed, I think, in the course of the debate, the then Chancellor, George Osborne, to block us and say, we're not going to allow you to use our currency. And sadly, a lot of people didn't understand the very strong economic argument that was put by Alex Salmond, which was, well, you can say that, but you don't have the power to do it. And I think a lot of voters on the doorstep were frightened by the long-term prospects and were worried about what the Tories and George Osborne would do to an independent Scotland. And I don't think we won that debate.
When it comes to maybe contrasting the Growth Commission to politics right now, it's really in the face of an uncertain Brexit scenario. But Labour have come forward recently, put forward their own amendments to the EU withdrawal bill. But there's, from what I've gathered today at the SNP conference, and from opinions from MPs and MSPs and activists, they're still not clear themselves where Labour stand. From your perspective, do you think Labour's stance on Brexit is any more clear?
Well, it's clear to the extent that Keir Starmer, who's an old friend of mine, was incredibly honest on the Today programme, and he said one of the problems is, and he was explicit about it in a way that politicians aren't often, he said Labour's divided on this. I cannot get one of those amendments through the House of Commons on the basis of Labour votes because my party is divided. And I think that was absolutely honest of him to say that. I'm quite clear. I think that we should be a member of the single market. I think that's vital for Scottish goods and services. And Corbyn has said you can't be in the single market if you're outside the European Union. It's patently nonsense, and everybody knows that it's nonsense. But he continues to say that and to talk about a single market. The European Union is... the Tories and the Labour Party conduct this debate as if all they've got to do is agree amongst themselves in their own parties, and then the issue is resolved. That's just a starting position. Then they've got to go to the European Union, and they've got to face an incredibly united 27 member states who've shown that there are no pushover in any of these arguments. So I think we've got to remain in the single market. I think it's vital for Scotland. I think it will be dreadful of the House of Commons if the Conservatives win on the single market issue and pulling out of the single market. I think that would be terrible. But of course, ultimately, Scotland's got to be independent and I believe a member of the European Union, and then we don't have these problems.
Final question around Brexit, more specifically on the power grab as labelled by the Scottish Government and others who support the Scottish Government. Do you think, because we know the Scottish National Party clearly claims it's a power grab and they're trying to do all they can to stop it occurring by trying to reach an agreement with the UK Government, but do you think Labour are doing enough to support the Scottish Government in both Holyrood and Westminster to try and stop this power grab?
No, I think it's very tribal. I think Westminster's tribal. I think Holyrood is tribal. Everybody knows there's not a huge gulf between the SNP and the Labour Party in policy terms. Everybody knows that. So there are very artificial divisions. The one big division is over the Constitution. Labour exaggerates the difference between the parties enormously. But Labour's not very engaged with the Constitution. All Labour cares about is winning UK general elections. And for them, Scotland matters because Scotland can provide some seats towards the tally they need to get across the threshold into 10 Downing Street. That's all Labour's ever really seen Scotland for, alas. Labour expected us to be quiescent and acquiescent throughout all of the Thatcher years because they wanted to cross the finishing line and get into 10 Downing Street. So I'm afraid very distrustful about Labour when it comes to the Constitution. I think the average voter doesn't really engage with this argument about a power grab. I don't think most people really understand what the power grab's about. They don't know what the specific areas are that will be retained by Westminster after Brexit. I don't think they're really following the detail of the debate. I think as politicians and journalists, often it's important we remember who we're engaging with amongst the general public and talk in terms that people can grasp. And for me, on Brexit, it's very simple. Ultimately, if you want Scotland to flourish, it needs to be as an independent country. We need to control the levers of power. We need to have access to both the UK market, which is guaranteed. We know we've discovered that because of Ireland and Northern Ireland, so we know we'll have free access to the rest of the UK market. But we vitally need to have access to the European market as well. We need to be an independent country within Europe, and I see no reason why to look back at the Growth Commission. We shouldn't be every bit as successful as Finland or Denmark. They've had a head start on us, they've been independent for a wee bit longer, but my goodness, we should catch up.
John Nicholson, journalist and broadcaster, thank you very much
Pleasure.
for joining today.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for watching our conference special report. We will be back tomorrow with more coverage from the SNP 2018 Spring Conference. And on Sunday, we'll round up on our conference coverage with a special full Scottish. See you then.